Thank you very much for everyone coming today. I hope you can all hear me okay. I'm delighted to be in conversation with Susan Stronge this afternoon. For those of you who don't know, my name is Mehreen Chida-Razvi. Obviously, I'm a Mughal art historian specializing in the 16th and 17th centuries, particularly the reign of Jahangir. Sue Stronge is senior curator of South Asian arts at the Victoria and Albert Museum. She's an expert on Mughal and Sikh arts and material culture, and particularly of the Mughals during the reigns of Akbar, Jahangir, and Shah Jahan. And she has recently opened an exhibition that she's curated at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London called The Great Mughals, Art, Architecture, and Opulence, which covers the periods of Akbar's, Jahangir's, and Shah Jahan's reign. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, about that particular exhibition. So the way we're formulating the panel is that Sue will give you a brief introduction to the exhibit, and then we'll enter the Q&A with her and I, and then we'll open it up for questions. So, Sue, please.
Okay, thank you, Mehreen, and it's a great pleasure to be here and to share a conversation with someone who's equally passionate about the Mughals as I am. The exhibition covers about 100 years. It spans 3 reigns, the reigns of Akbar, who you see in the middle of the painting on the left, Jahangir and Shah Jahan, widely regarded as the golden age of Mughal art. And you can see the territory covered on the right, which I don't need to explain to this audience. But the 2 central themes of the exhibition, which I think are a slightly unusual take on the subject, are first and foremost the internationalism of the court, and particularly as it was expressed in the great cities, in Lahore, in Agra, in Delhi, and at the beginning in Fatehpur Sikri. And then secondly, the enormous influence of Iran through the transmission of the Persian language. And the influence of Iran on the arts, I think, has been slightly underplayed, I think, in the past. But we should bear in mind that not only was Persian the cultural language of the court, it was also the administrative language of the entire empire. And this was an innovation of Akbar's Hindu finance minister. So the fact that the language was so prevalent meant that you had an enormous influx from Iran of poets, artists, calligraphers, artists, and so on. So all these people were bringing different traditions to the already very deeply embedded, very sophisticated traditions of Hindustan, as the Mughals called their own territories. Now, the exhibition is arranged chronologically by reign, and you can see that it's very multimedia. And so one of the challenges was to try and navigate a simple narrative through quite a complicated arrangement of objects. And it might be worth mentioning that about a third of the objects on show, 220 or so objects, about a third comes from the V&A. The rest are loans from national and international collections. And one of the most important collections was the Al Sabah collection in Kuwait. So we're, as ever, enormously indebted to the collections from whom we borrow.
Sue, you just mentioned or highlighted the fact that there are many types of different mediums that the exhibition covers. And one of the things I should have said at the beginning is that that's one of the really innovative things about the exhibition that Sue has put on. There have, of course, been exhibitions on Mughal art, but they tend to have focused on a painting or, specific, not specific, covering the entire span of the Mughal Empire. This is I think I'm correct in saying it's the first exhibition which is looking at so many different mediums and focusing on such a specific period of time.
On this particular end, there's a marvelous exhibition in Rome that dealt with Akbar, which did the same thing, but this is the first to have covered these 3 different reigns to trace the origins and development of a new art and how it evolved over the following 100 years.
Yeah. So you see on the screen behind us this wine tankard of Ulugh Beg, who was the 3rd Timurid emperor. And Sue, you open the exhibition with this particular object, and it's a really important object for many reasons. Not only is it aesthetically quite stunning and beautiful, but it is really important in terms of speaking to the concepts of how important dynasty and legacy was to the Mughals. So I wonder if you can speak about that and how the object represents that. And also, I'm sure you can see that inscriptions feature quite heavily on the tankard as well. So if you could also tell us a bit about those inscriptions.
Well, this links the Mughal emperors with their Timurid ancestry, as Mehreen just said. Mughal, of course, is the Persian for Mongol, which was the other element of their ancestry. But they stress the Timurid inheritance very considerably, and that's emphasized throughout the exhibition. And the fact that this belonged to Ulugh Beg made it a very precious possession for the Mughal rulers. And this was given to Jahangir. It was then engraved by one of his master engravers with the inscriptions on the right, which record Jahangir's ownership. And then there's another inscription which you probably can't at all make out, but this is one naming Shah Jahan. So it became a dynamic in terms of its preciousness, but also its significance as a Timurid artifact.
Now we're going to move into the three different parts of the exhibition. And one of the things already mentioned is the breadth of materials which are on display. Producing the best materials in best objects in different types of materials. And obviously painting is probably one of the mediums that people are most familiar with alongside architecture. And at the opening of the Akbar section of the exhibition, Sue has put these two paintings. It's a double-page spread of the Akbarname, the history of Akbar. And we see this painting of the construction of Agra Fort. And Sue, why did you pick this particular pairing, and what can it tell us about the imperial workshops?
Well, the challenge was, as I said, was to navigate a clear path through this multiplicity of materials. And it seemed that the most vivid manifestation of Mughal art here is the art of the book. And this, of course, was a very significant text that was illustrated. It was commissioned by Akbar, the history of his reign, and he commissioned it from the great scholar, the sense. Of course, this is a manuscript that was illustrated in Lahore during a period of when the court shifted to the northern capital. But this is important also because it gave me the idea for setting up the first section, which is Abul Fazl in the Akbarnama, the history of the reign, surveys the institutions of the court. And within that, he surveys the workshops. And the most important was the House of Books, the Kitab-Khane. And we should remember at this point that Akbar, one of the great paradoxes of his life was that this boy who became emperor at the age of 18 when his father suddenly died could not read or write, and yet was one of the great patrons of the art of the book. And we shouldn't think that he was ignorant because he couldn't read or write. The theory is perhaps that he was dyslexic, but there's a very amusing incident of when the ceremony of this little boy appearing before his tutors for the first day when he was going to be taught to read and write, aged 4 years, 4 months and 4 days. And when the auspicious time came, the little boy had run away and couldn't be found anywhere. And so later on, he became this great patron of the art of the book and had the books read out to him. So, of course, there were court readers. He had a phenomenal memory. Now, Abul Fazl tells us that within the workshops, calligraphy was always the greatest art. And so we begin the exhibition with monumental calligraphy from an imperial Quran, which was in the Royal Library. And then also, because one of the emphases of the exhibition is that there isn't the Western between fine and effective art, things were shared. And so designs that were being produced by artists would be translated into different media, and calligraphy, of course, was extremely important, not just on architecture and paper, but on objects as well. And so this is an ablution vessel which may have been made in Lahore, but which combines a very Hindustani form with very so the Iranian influence here, but also extremely fine calligraphy. And then we go on to the art of the book, which began the history of Mughal.
To be the first proper emperor of an empire. And alongside that, we have then the creation of these and one of the really fascinating things about the painting atelier under Akbar is that it was enormous. There were at least 120
100 artists of note.
Of
so
note.
There were other people as well as that.
So 100 plus artists working in the painting atelier. And they were from different backgrounds of training. So we have artists who are trained in a Persian tradition, in a Rajasthani tradition, in the different regional sultanate courts of the Muslim courts of northern Hindustan. And their difference in training. And during Akbar's time is when we then develop a Mughal style of painting. And this has to do with the key artists from Iran who are and how this wonderful Hamzaname painting reflects that coming together.
So these were, the Iranians came with Akbar's father when he lost the Akbar brought back with him to Iranian master artists who were then given the positions of superintendents of the workshops. And so, as Mehreen said, you had lots of differently trained artists working under them from across Hindustan. And so you have in this illustration to the Hamnama, which was the first huge project of the Kitabkhane, which took place over 15 years. Relatively few of I think there were 1,200 painting. The contemporary sources are slightly, there are discrepancies, but over 1,000 paintings, of which fewer than 200 have survived. They're big, they're about that size, but you can see here this sort of clash of different shining figure at the top, I think, reflects Hindustani traditions. And this was being done in the 1560s and 70s. By the end of Akbar's reign, by the 1590s, you have a much smaller, more refined, more homogeneous but so used to seeing paintings hanging on the walls because dealers typically remove them from manuscripts because they don't read the text, it's irrelevant, they don't see volumes from manuscripts and albums. And so it was very important to me that we put complete manuscripts in the exhibition, but also illustrating the fact that the great Persian classics would be read by everyone at court, whether you were Hindu or Muslim. army. One of the subsections keys to the success of Akbar's reign was the fact that he was promoting understanding and mutual respect between followers of different religions. And key to that was to translate into Persian for non-Hindus to be able to read them and understand the basic tenets of Hinduism. And on the right, you see an illustration to Akbar's grandfather's memoirs, which were written in Eastern Turkey and then translated into a language which more people understood by the 1590s. Then we come to the art of the goldsmith, which is extremely challenging for a curator to include because it's so rare. And there are a great many fakes on the market, and actually in museum collections. So it's very difficult. There are very few authentic pieces to show the splendor and the extraordinary workmanship. Technique which allows the stones to be set with great delicacy, and here again you can see a combination of form and design, which it combines a Hindustani tradition with very Safavid ornamentation. And I should point out this one, which is one of the great treasures of the Al-Sabah collection, which is set with hundreds of beautifully cut precious stones.
And it's the Kundan technique, isn't it?
It's the Kundan technique, yeah.
Which probably many of you are familiar with. And one of the things which it's possibly a bit hard to see unless you're standing in front of these objects, the gold work is so refined and so incredible. But what you're seeing as gold, particularly, possibly you can see it on the spoon, the gold itself has then been worked and carved. So I hope you can see those little floral decorations and the flowers, giving an extra sense of luxury and ornamentation to the objects. And then one of the things I love about the scabbard and the handle on the dagger, birds, very delicately made of the emeralds, of the rubies as well. And again, it just product. So we are seeing now examples of other arts being produced in the imperial workshops. So the goldsmithing was one of them, and then we then move on to metalwork. Now, one of the things which was really fascinating for me about Sue's exhibition is the emphasis she gives to very rare to see this in any exhibition on the Mughals. It tends to be passed over, but it was such an important artistic production. But
personal prejudice. I'm very fond of metalwork, so I was keen to put a lot in, but also to show the inventiveness of the forms, of the techniques, of the metallurgy. I mean, there are extraordinary techniques. To show contemporary paintings, and if you can see here, this vessel is very similar in form to this one, so you can be fairly sure that it was of the late Akbar period. But it is difficult, but it would be a shame to miss it out because of the inventiveness of the traditions, and there are many, many. Then one of the other things that Akbar was very fond of was carpets, and was very keen to establish workshops which would produce carpets that would emulate those of Iran, and he did so very successfully. So you had workshops in Lahore, you had carpet workshops in Agra and in his new city of Fatehpur Sikri. But again, you can see the shared designs that were being produced by the painters, and if you can make out here, the mythical bird, the mythical animal, which is clutching these elephants, which is exactly copied in the carpet design, and at the same period was also found in architecture and inlaid in ivory on wood. So it's a very shared design repertoire.
And then we see the exhibition an emphasis that Sue gives to regional workshops and their production, because obviously the Mughals, they come into the region and they create their empire, they start to conquer. So we then have areas with their own traditions into becoming part of work that Gujarat was famous for producing. Possibly some of you are familiar with this type of work, possibly you're not. It's obviously a very striking aesthetic. And Sue, can you talk a little bit about the work that the provinces were doing and how it played into the gift culture at the Mughal court?
Well, we know from contemporary sources that every province had its own special industries. The problem is that they're not described and they're certainly not illustrated. So you might get a list of highly sophisticated craft tradition which predated the arrival of the Mughals. So there were very early transmission of objects inlaid with mother of pearl. And this shield on the left actually design, and it was in the Medici collection as a before that. Circulating certainly through Goa, Portuguese Goa, but also using this technique were being commissioned for the Mughal court, and a canopy over the shrine of in Nizamuddin has a mother of pearl inlaid canopy, which was definitely made and commissioned in Ahmedabad.
And then we see examples in paintings that Sue brings into the exhibition, which speaks to another point of cultural contact, which is the European Christian contact that the Mughal court was having. So we know that Jesuit missionaries were invited to Akbar's court in 1580 at Fatehpur Sikri. Two subsequent missions came as well, both of them to Lahore, one of them to Lahore. And we see this individual material being produced at the time. Talk a bit about that contact and how it impacted the artistic production of the Mughal artists. And you can see the painting on the left is probably copied from an early oil painting, whereas the European influence on the two works on the right from the Louvre are much more inventive. But this is in the exhibition an interregnum between Akbar and Jahangir, both of whom were almost fighting over each other to get their hands on any new art that was coming to court, but particularly European works, and were in competition over it. So this leads you into the reign of Jahangir, who succeeds as a ride because the main battles have been fought. He inherited a huge treasury, a huge library, very well-trained artists and craftsmen, and so he just handed over any warfare to his son Shah Jahan, and got on with his life predominantly of leisure, actually hunting and commissioning works of art. But we gave in the exhibition, we gave this section a completely different feel. So everything has its own colour, its own atmosphere. And you can see here the large carpet at the back, which was produced under Jahangir's reign, again probably in Lahore. But the treasury of the world is a quotation which comes from the mouth of the first English ambassador to the Mughal court, Sir Thomas Roe, who
despite standing very much on his dignity all the time, and nevertheless was dazzled by the splendor of the jewels that were being worn, and also rather alarmed by the way that gold came into the empire and never left it. So it was sucking in economically all gold and silver. But he made a comment about this being the treasury of the world. And there you see the inventiveness of Jahangir in the set of zodiac coins, but also coins minted for his wife. Of course, he had many wives, but in 1611 married Nur Jahan, who became his constant companion and soulmate. And she had the unusual, if not unique, I think, honour of having struck in
her or princesses to have it done. So we've already mentioned that there's a very strong Persian impact into the arts of the court. But this is also, there is a Persian that's heritage of the Mughals, obviously, because of their Timurid heritage. And they took on trappings of ceremonials associated with the Persianate world, and one of the big ones was Nowruz, and that involved great celebrations and
against precious artifacts, and that's represented here. Jahangir is at the centre of the painting, weighing the future Shah Jahan, because the Crown Prince would also be given the same honour. And this is a very unusual view of the inside of the princely mansion, which was actually in Kabul at the time. And the array of gifts at the bottom gives a little glimpse of the sort of forms of precious jewellery and daggers which have not survived. But on the right, I just include a couple of precious things from the Al-Sabah collection. The jewelled piece in the centre would be the top of a scabbard. So you get a glimpse of the opulence of the weapons that will be exchanged at these festivals. But also, this is a jade ink pot made for Jahangir. At Nowruz, all the artists, the poets, and everyone would bring out their creations specially for the occasion. So the poets would compose verses for Nowruz, celebrating the gentle clouds wafting across the sky in springtime. And that's echoed in this piece, this jade inkwell made for Jahangir, which was probably a Nowruz present, brought out by a named jade worker about whom we know absolutely nothing, which is very typical for these men of the workshops.
Now, jade is one of the very precious objects that the Mughal emperors really appreciated. And the mines the jade that they used to create these objects, it was in Kota. And then worked. And the jade pieces, I think, are some of the really elite examples of showing how skilled these craftsmen are, because jade is so incredibly difficult to work with. And so not only do you have the blocks, which are then winnowed down to create these incredibly fine objects, but then after that you have the engraving of the flowers, the Chinese clouds, and here you see again a jade cup of Jahangir, which is very highly engraved, and the skill of the lapidaries who are creating the jade objects, but then on top of that, the calligrapher, who is then working in this medium as well.
Well, this is an interesting piece because, as you say, jade is very difficult because you can't carve it. You have to break it. this detective story of working out this unique case of knowing that he produced this cup, because the Persian verses on it can be directly linked to him as a poet. So it's quite an unusual thing. It's a small cup, it's about that size, and it reflects the rarity of jade at this period. But it's a centuries-old history of working rock crystal, which was exactly the same technique, so it was applied to a new material. And this is probably an inscription of Saidar on the left, recording the ownership of this journey. And so I think this is probably Saidar's hand.
Okay, we're going to try to get through the rest of the presentation in the next 10 minutes or so, because we want to make sure we have time for questions. But for those of you who know me, you know Jahangir is my favorite emperor, and the work that's produced during his reign is just, for me, the most interesting and fascinating. And one of the genres being created at that time is work that is very heavily informed by the natural world. And Sue brings this out in the exhibition really, really beautifully in a section on the traveling court. And Sue, if you can just talk a bit about these two particular examples that you've pulled up, which show the incredible talent of Jahangir's artists in creating these natural images.
Well, these were his two most famous artists, who he names in his own memoirs, Mansour and Abul Hassan. Mansour was the famous artist painting the natural world, was said to have produced a lot of floral studies which haven't survived, but also representations of animals. And this is this is one of our most famous paintings in the V&A. This would have been done as an illustration for Jahangir's memoirs, but it's interesting also because it's got his own handwriting on it, which is, again, quite distinctive. It's a very spidery, where he misses off a lot of the dots on the letters. But this was an exotic animal, obviously, that came into court. And the one on the right seems to be a combination of the work of both his leading artists, one who did the character, the figure at the bottom, and Mansour, who did the squirrels in the tree. As Mehreen said, just to make sure that the rebellion didn't develop. So they did travel a lot, but Jahangir travelled enormously, and at one point was away from his major capital, Agra, for 5 years. So that's a long time to be travelling around. About travelling and the hunt, and this incense burner on the right was made for his master of the hunt. And this also artifacts. The piece on the left was a marble panel which Jahangir commissioned to be the decoration derives ultimately from European herbal drawings, botanical drawings, which we know were seen and copied by the Mughal artists and then transferred into paintings and also onto engraved marble. Now, things which was completely fascinating for me is that, if you don't mind my saying so, Sue's husband is an expert in network. And does lots of research on the topic, and he has discovered that we have a Lahore School of Metalwork. Now, we assume that within the imperial capitals, so Lahore, Delhi, Agra, particularly when it was the capital, we assume that all the workshops are present and they are producing. But we have not had, until now, proof to actually place objects and their production in any of those cities. And
to identify particular pieces, which were actually made in Lahore, which is completely wonderful to me. So Sue, if you can talk a bit about that, please.
Yeah, I mean, we did, the one exception we had for Lahore was the astrolabes, who of course were in Lahore. But this is entirely new research, and the key piece, this is a very unprepossessing slide, but it took enormous effort through Abulullah Sudavar to get this image of a key piece, which you can see was made for someone inscribed as a murid of Jahangir. And the piece on the right from the David collection, they acquired quite a few years ago, is described in Armenian workshops. And of course the Armenians were very important as traders, but also as translators for foreigners of Persian. And then we go on to these pieces which we don't know where they were made, but it seemed important to include arms and armour because that reflects how the Mughals supported their power, that warfare was a significant aspect of life, but also they're so beautifully made and designed and chiselled. And then that leads us into the reign of Shah Jahan. Shah Jahan, of course, meaning king of the world. And you see these visual metaphors in painting of Shah Jahan as king of the world. And again, this section has its own very distinctive feel, and we couldn't not put in.
So within the exhibition, Sue has included this model of Mumtaz Mahal's sarcophagus and items like what you see on the right, which are these company-era drawings of details of the Taj Mahal. And what I always say is that, you know, if you don't talk about the Taj Mahal in any kind of lecture on Mughal whatever, there will be a riot. So we've mentioned it, and now we move on.
But actually, it turned out, the more research I did, the more important it seemed, because this is, of course, the key monument of the early years of Shah Jahan's reign, but actually sets a very distinctive decorative program which is followed out then through all the arts of the reign, where he's presenting the empire as the Garden of Paradise under his just rule. So you get for the first time a unified floral style which you see across the arts. We go within this Taj Mahal section, we allude also to the imperial family because it was a problem representing women, because there are almost no contemporary portraits of the royal women. There's no contemporary portrait of Mumtaz Mahal. I don't think, is there?
Jerry identified one.
Maybe one.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Maybe one. But this is an exception,
yeah.
if you want to talk
And this
about
is Nadira Banu Begum, so Dara Shikoh's wife, and it's from what's called the Dara Shikoh album in the British Library, which is thought to have been made for Nadira Banu at the time of her engagement to Dara Shikoh. And obviously, we felt it had quite a nice resonance because we had her mausoleum here in Lahore.
And it shows you that, as you would expect, the jewels worn by the royal women were every bit as opulent as those worn by the men. But just surveying some of the things which we include, which represent the floral theme, we have tiles, and you'll recognise probably the tile at the right. We don't know where they were from, possibly Lahore, maybe Kabul, from a Mughal monument there, but definitely the northern provinces of the empire. And then I think this is likely to have been made in a Lahore workshop, and you can see again the relationship of designs in different media, the same sort of vase motif being shown on the tiles and the carpets.
And then I hope many of you are familiar with Akbar. One of the obviously very visible in the Taj Mahal here in Lahore at Jahangir's mausoleum, the art of Pietra Dura. became very prominent during Shah Jahan's reign, particularly on his architectural commissions. And the sarcophagus that you see here would have been made by Shah Jahan's imperial workshop, probably made at the same time that Mumtaz Mahal's is being made for the Taj Mahal in Agra. We have this.
But what's important here is that it sets one of the styles of the reign. So you see the same colour scheme being replicated in other media. Red is a very difficult colour to reproduce in enamel, and you also see it on the carpet. And just to give you a glimpse of the logistics and the difficulties of installing these huge things, this is 900 centimetres wide and had to be unrolled and then rolled up and then mounted using scaffolding. So this was just one object which took an entire day to install. But then we finish off with hard stones, which are one of the great treasures of Shah Jahan's reign. He was a very accomplished gemologist and obviously loved precious stones and hard stones. So we include his famous cup, which is in the V&A. And then the treasury of precious stones, which is so important. And I mentioned at the beginning the calligraphy of Saidar, and the key to identifying his calligraphy is this spinel in the middle, this large red stone, which is another Ulugh Beg object, which was inherited by the Mughals, and we know that the inscription written by Saidar, because Jahangir tells us that in his memoirs, and so we have an absolutely authentic example of Saidar's very distinctive calligraphy. Designs were constantly evolving and being reinterpreted and despite the decline of the emperors. And finally, I'll give an unashamed plug for the book, which has contributions by a lot of different, very highly competent experts, and a wonderful historical introduction by Rajiv Kinra, which I think is well worth reading. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sue. So we have about 10 minutes for questions. If we can have the mics out. Okay, we've got one on this side and then one on this side after.
And I'm Mehreen, and I'm a curator from London and Delhi, and I work on South Asian art with contemporary. So when I saw this exhibition, it was very exciting because, of course, it shows the enormous amount of work that has been done behind it. I just wanted to understand, how do you, when you are curating an exhibition of this larger scale and with this amount of objects in your hands, how do you work on the exclusion, which ones are not to be,
It's a good question. It's quite complicated because it depends who will lend and the logistics of borrowing. I mean, it's quite a complicated process, made even more complicated by the fact that I pitched this just before the pandemic. So then it's almost impossible to say. It's personal prejudice and choice. I choose selfishly the objects I like best, and then it depends who will lend. And I must say, our lenders were extremely generous and cooperative. But I perhaps also ought to mention that the curator, who is person who's identified. There are so many people who are involved in putting on a show like this as well. So there's an enormous underpinning of conservators, of exhibition managers, of people raising money because we don't have the funds and so on. So all these come into play. It's a very complicated jigsaw of what's available, what might be available, what you can afford to borrow, what is in its state to borrow, and so on. It is a complicated issue.
My name is Amira.
exhibition. There's a question which I'm sure is in the minds of everyone who's here right now. Lahore being one of the three capitals of the Mughal era, is there anything you found or were able to source from the National Museum in Lahore or any of the private collections or the private museums? Or have we lost it all to the rest of the world?
I'm not very competent to answer that, but I think Lahore Museum has tiles there which are not catalogued. I mean, I've seen a list which describes quite a lot of tiles. Right. And so you've got things like that. I mean, you've got the monuments. I don't know what you may have in terms of artifacts. But if you look at certain classes of material like textiles, wherever they're from, they're quite rare from this period because they simply haven't survived. So metalwork has survived, and I'm sure that there must be metalwork in Pakistan, but I don't know where.
That's great. Hoping to see something from even the national or the private collections in Pakistan in the future.
Look out for metalwork, and if you find any, tell me, please.
Thank you.
This is Ajaz from Nurse University. William Demple has written extensively on Kohinoor diamond, which was took away from Lahore under the Sikh government. And since there are many claims, many stakeholders are asking for the Kohinoor diamond back. Afghanistan is claiming, Pakistan is claiming, Iran is also claiming, and it is lying in the British Museum. And since Lahore Museum is deprived, and we have the strongest claim being the Kohinoor diamond was taken away from Lahore. Your comment, please. Can we get back our Kohinoor diamond?
It completely transformed from what it was when it was removed. And it was, as you know, it was one of the articles of the Treaty of Lahore when it was removed from the Sikh treasury. And then it was exhibited at the Great Exhibition. And it was a big disappointment. You know, there was this hype about exhibiting the Kohinoor. And then the crowds that went to the Great Exhibition found it a great disappointment. So they to recut it in Western style. And so the stone that you see now is not the stone that was taken. It is the same stone, but it's reduced in weight by a third. So it's become a symbol, and you
Thank you both for a wonderful discussion. My name is Leila Rahman. I worked briefly with Robert Skelton on my Mughal pieces. And I want you to know, I like what you said about Jahangir. He is truly the most human out of them all, and so I love him the best. Everything to kind of power that.
I mean, it's like trying to pick one's favourite child, isn't it? I think the range of artifacts and paintings that were produced for Jahangir are absolutely sensational, but they are in every, you can find great works of art in all the reigns. I think the one significant published, and that's the his reign.
I-
But then the architecture, you know, it's almost impossible.
out in jewelry with the halo, that idea of wearing the wealth of the world and just presenting sumptuous and luxury and opulence and wealth, which all equates with power. That, I think, is one of the key kind of visual output. And we see that obviously in the paintings, the way architecture begins to be transformed as well. I think that's projection, the visualization of power. I've got time for one more.
Thank you for this wonderful lecture. I'm Gurmeet Rai, a conservation architect from India. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating to see the range of materials and embellishments and all of that. But if you were to extend it to architecture, so my question really would be, because I mean, back in India, we have a lot of conservators working in museums, so kind of very comfortable, and they kind of catalog, they research, they kind of. But in terms of architecture, to have the adequate understanding of stylistically, materially, to be able to restore the monuments of that period in a manner that the authenticity and the integrity of the monument is preserved. My question would be that, have you come across a lot of literature or access to materials that would inform better conservation practice on buildings? Because that's what we have in the subcontinent.
Yes,
Minus the artifacts.
But it would, I mean, that's a fundamentally important question, but I mean, this isn't one I'm remotely qualified to answer, but I would have thought that you still have traditional practitioners of doing, for instance, wall paintings and plasterwork. I think that one of the things is not to do and not done the preliminary examination of what's already there to learn from what's there and then work out what should be done.
The other is to work with just the fabric and, like the bricks and mortar. So we've kind of got that somehow sorted. But when it comes to work with it, work with these buildings on the molecular level, to understand, one is, to understand the source and the compositions, that's all very well. But in terms of understanding the pigments, the glues, the binders, the techniques of, the wet plaster, all of that, there are discontinuities there. So that's one part of the story. The other, of course, is, like you said, that the use of most conservators would work with materials which don't belong to the landscape. They kind of come from outside. So there's continuities, but what's interesting in Lahore for me is that there are continuities here which, in the Islamic, if I were to look at the art practice of buildings here, more than what I find in the Indian side of it,
Interesting.
I'll just add one of their comments, which is that what we very frustratingly about to the production are very few and far between, and I think there's always hope that somebody will find something, you know, in archival material which will give us something new to work with. I recently a company artist working for British doing typical kind of architectural drawings and details of the great monuments. But what was fascinating about this one was that at the end of this album, they had the artist had painted samples of all the different types of marble which were used in the Mughal monuments, and they all were named. So that was quite interesting, and that was quite new. And obviously, it doesn't speak to the kind of, you know, molecular level that you're talking about, but I think it highlights that there's haven't found yet, which will